news show. In this episode, we talk about over 22 lakh people potentially becoming new voters in J&K. We also talk about the participation of women in science increasing in the past 20 years. But first, we talk about Pakistan. Back in April, Imran Khan was ousted as the Prime Minister of Pakistan after he lost a no-confidence motion. This was the time when all the opposition parties had been against Khan, his alliance partners had left him, and the Pakistan army no longer wanted him to be in power. After he was voted out, Shehbaz Sharif took his place. And since then, he has been trying to tackle Pakistan's precarious economic and political situation. Also during this time, Imran Khan's popularity seems to have grown, especially amongst his massive support base. But right now, he's in the news for a different reason. Earlier this week, Khan was booked under the country's strict anti-terror laws and might soon be arrested for it. In this segment, Indian Express's national editor of strategic affairs, Nirupama Subramanian, joins us to talk about the situation. Nirupama, what do we know about the reason that Khan has been booked under these charges?
So the most proximate reason is that one of his aides, by the name of Shehbaz Gill, was arrested last week, allegedly for trying to incite a mutiny in the Pakistan army, saying that you should not obey orders if you think they are illegal or they are evil orders. Several people in the PTI, and Imran Khan and other people in the PTI, have alleged that Shehbaz Gill was tortured in prison and was sexually abused and all that. And they've been demanding action against the police officials and the judge also for remanding him to 2 days police custody. What happened soon thereafter was that Imran Khan had held a huge public rally, which he has been doing. He has been sort of mobilizing his supporters ever since he was ousted as Prime Minister through a no-confidence vote. So this was one of those rallies in which he threatened that he would see that the police officials involved in the case and the magistrate involved in the case would all be punished when he came to power. And he named those people, and the judge is a woman, and he said that he will see to it, he'll ensure that they get punished.
IG, Islamabad IG, tum और DIG, तुम्हें तो हमने नहीं छोड़ना, तुम्हारे ऊपर केस करना हमने। और मैजिस्ट्रेट साहिबा, ज़ेबा, आप भी तैयार हो जाएं, आपके ऊपर भी हम एक्शन लेंगे। आप सबको शर्म आनी चाहिए। अगर गिल के ऊपर केस हो सकता है तो ये सारे फजलू के ऊपर, नवाज शरीफ के ऊपर, राणा सनाउल्लाह, इन सब के ऊपर हम केस करने लगे हैं।
So the government then went on to slap terrorism charges against him under their own anti-terrorism law, which dates back to 1997. And under that, there's this clause that if you terrorize by word or deed, if you create fear among people, then you can be booked under this act. So that is a clause they've used against him, essentially.
And so how serious is this situation for Khan, and what is expected to happen next?
So on Monday, he did get anticipatory bail, or he got protection from arrest until the 25th of this month. So until then, he cannot be arrested. But yeah, it does carry the threat of arrest. And his supporters have immediately took to the streets on Monday saying that he's a red line. Like the minute you arrest Imran Khan, you've crossed that red line. So this whole action by the government has mobilized his supporters even more than before. I think even our listeners would know, we've done so many programs on this, that ever since he's been ousted, he's rallied people and he's found his pitch to the people that he was victim of an American conspiracy to have him removed from prime ministership has found a lot of supporters in the Aam Aadmi of Pakistan. His constituency is basically the middle class, and there is an anti-American sentiment that has been running through the Pakistani middle class for a long time, for maybe even more than 20 years, maybe 30 years even. So people have believed that and they've been rallying around him. So his arrest, if it happens, could actually lead to more support for him among the people of Pakistan.
Okay, and we know Imran Khan had first come to power with the help of the army, and the army also had a role in his ousting. And this latest move is also being seen as a way to clamp down on him. So how has the army reacted to these charges?
So the army is a force behind this whole thing. I think in Pakistan, as I say, the army is the most powerful institution. And Imran Khan has been having a go at the army since his falling out. I mean, even before that, he has been sort of having a confrontation with the army since at least last October, when he wanted the ISI chief to remain the ISI chief, whereas the army had decided that he's going to be transferred. And he sat on the appointment of a new ISI chief on the names for several weeks until it came to a break point, and then he had to sign off on the name that had been decided. So that really was the break point with the army, which had already started feeling that they had brought the wrong guy to power in 2018 because he had proved a little more than inept at governance. He had promised so much when he came to power. His main thing was, of course, corruption. But he had also said, I'll make Pakistan into the new Medina and so forth. So many welfare measures he had promised, all that. Nothing came of anything. So there was a huge disappointment at his inability, even among the people who voted for him. There was a lot of disappointment that he had failed to keep his promises. And in the army, there was a real rethink about his usefulness in that sense. And thereafter, of course, it was just 6 months and then you saw this whole no confidence vote coming up. And he has believed that it was the army all along, with the help of the United States, that actually got him out. And he has been going at the army since then. He has called them names. He's called the army chief names. And trying to provoke the army is very dangerous territory. And Imran Khan has been doing this right through. I think his aim is basically to say that Bajwa is the bad guy and I'm with the rest of the army. Let's get rid of Bajwa. I think that has been his thing. Bajwa is the present chief, and as long as he's the chief, he remains the head of the institution, and their responses are institutional. So I think although his pitch has found some resonance in the middle rungs of the army, it is said that many of them do support him. In the top echelons, I think there's a sense of disquiet at being attacked like this day after day after day.
Okay, so considering that his supporter base has grown during this period, could these charges and his arrest potentially go against the plans of the army and the government to clamp down on him?
So yeah, it could work to actually enhance the support for him. And especially if he's arrested, I think the government and the army would end up shooting themselves in the foot, because it would just be like handing it over to him completely, because he has learned what works with the people and he has been galvanizing his supporters and others as well around him. So he has considerable support. In fact, people say that if there was an election today, he would win hands down, which is why he has been pushing for an early election. Whereas the government and the army want to put it off. And they have been saying no. Prime Minister Shahbaz Gill has said it more than once, that this government will serve out its full term and have an election only in August 2023. And the government also needs time to stabilize the economy. Right now, what they've done is they've taken a lot of harsh measures which are not going down well with the people, because they're negotiating with the IMF. They have to do the belt tightening that the IMF demands. And, this is another thing that makes the government unpopular. So at this moment, the government of Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif is very unpopular. So they want the situation to stabilize, which they hope to do if they can get the IMF bailout package and all that. Before that, they believe that they can stabilize the situation by the time of the next election, which is why Imran Khan is also very desperate that the election should be held right away. We can capitalize on various of these things, of these dynamics.
And next we talk about Jammu and Kashmir. It has now been more than 3 years since the special status of J&K was revoked, and since the state was converted into 2 union territories as part of the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act. Now, since that time, the Election Commission in the region for the first time has begun the process of revising the electoral rolls. basically the lists of people who are enlisted to vote in the region. And according to the revision, more than 23 lakh new voters are expected to be added to the electoral rolls. The news has drawn criticism from the mainstream political parties in the region who say that this is a ploy of the central government and could lead to significant demographic changes in the region. In this segment, Indian Express's Naveed Iqbal joins us on a call from Srinagar to talk about it. Naveed, could you begin by telling us what is the significance of the revision of these electoral rolls?
See, J&K, since the revocation of special status in August 2019, has not had an elected assembly. So, which means that there are no elected representatives. There were panchayat elections, there were DDC elections, but people haven't really taken to those systems. And governance is largely directed through bureaucrats and through the Raj Bhavan, through the LG here. So, revision of electoral rolls essentially suggests a move towards an election and having an elected assembly in J&K. And also following delimitation, new constituencies have come into place. And so old constituencies have seen some revisions. So this is an important exercise towards a democratic shift in J&K.
Right, and talking about the delimitation exercise, the Delimitation Commission had recommended 7 additional constituencies, 6 for Jammu and 1 for Kashmir. And this essentially increases the number of constituencies in Jammu from 37 to 43 and in the Kashmir Valley from 46 to 47. Now, this move, of course, was criticized by the mainstream political parties in the region because Jammu, which is a Hindu-dominated area, got more seats relative to its population compared with the Kashmir Valley, which is a Muslim-dominated area. And this, they have said, violates the population criteria. But talking about the revision of the electoral rolls, could you talk about who all could vote in J&K before the abrogation of Article 370 and who all would be able to vote now?
So, before the revocation of special status, permanent resident certificate holders, PRC holders, could vote in elections. Only they could vote in elections, hold property and contest elections in J&K.
Basically, the permanent residents in the region.
Permanent residents, PRC holders, yeah. So, summary revision is an annual exercise. This used to take place every year of electoral rolls. But now a special summary revision of rolls, which can take place anytime, that is taking place after 4 years in J&K. So, the last was held in around September, October of 18, ahead of the panchayat elections, then to be held in J&K. So, since then, this is the first revision of electoral rolls. So, a certain broadening of who a resident of J&K is has happened. First, with the introduction of the domicile clause, which gave voting rights to West Pakistan refugees and people who'd been living here for 15 years or more. And also women who belong to Kashmir, those who married outside could not hold property or have, rights to vote here. All such people, that definition was broadened. But now, with what the CEO Hridesh Kumar said the other day about ordinarily residing in Kashmir, those people will be able to vote. So this is a further broadening of that definition. So from his understanding, he says about 22 to 25 lakh voters could be added to J&K's electoral rolls following the revision exercise, the qualifying date for which is October 1, 2022.
Now, 22 to 25 lakh new voters seems like a lot, but could you talk a bit more about this figure? Because since the Chief Electoral Officer Hridesh Kumar first mentioned this, the local administration has come out and made statements regarding it.
So, after Hridesh Kumar said this last Wednesday, on Saturday, the publicity wing of the J&K government issued what they're saying it is a response, but it's essentially a clarification on the CEO's statement saying that there's going to be at least 22 lakh first-time voters added to the rolls this year. So this figure is also run into confusion because in the last revision, the annual increase was about 3 lakh voters, 2017 to 18. But now over the last 3 years, government is saying we'll add 22 lakh first-time voters. So we are yet to see whether this figure is closer to correct or perhaps an exaggeration of what it could be. And there is one more technicality on why this figure is so huge. From my conversation with the previous CEOs who've been in this position, they said that the percentage of voters registered in J&K is far lesser than the national average. So nationally, more citizens per state or constituency are registered as voters, but in J&K that figure is far lower. So it is perhaps that gap also that they are aiming to fill, that more citizens should register as voters. So not just first-time voters, but also those who are not in the rolls at all. So that they are hoping will fill into this void.
Yeah, so we have heard that now an employee, a student, a laborer, or anyone else ordinarily residing in J&K can become a voter. But does that also include, for example, the armed forces that have been posted in the valley? Could they vote as well?
So there is no clarity on this yet because the CEO mentioned service voters, but the government clarification later did not speak of service voters at all. But J&K, since this is a state, is a disturbed area, forces are governed under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. So this isn't a peace station as such. There is no clarity on whether they'll be able to vote or not. But that is one of the things that political parties in J&K are seeking clarity on because the numbers of forces posted here, the sheer number is huge. So if, say, there are 700,000 forces, members of the security forces personnel here, apart from J&K police, if they get the right to vote, they could make or break a situation. And also you have to see J&K's voting percentages are not very high. So if this is a block that you introduce and they are made to vote or they do cast their ballot, then they could shift political numbers here.
And you mentioned the mainstream political parties. Could you talk about what they have said in this regard?
So all political parties have opposed this, barring the BJP, of course. One of the strongest reactions came from PDP chief Mehbooba Mufti, and all the apprehensions of demographic change that first came in with the removal of Article 370 and then got compounded by introducing the domicile clause have only gotten more further amplified. So their fear is that if you add such a large number of voters and if you say anybody who comes here and is ordinarily residing here can vote, and Sajad Lone said that every state has its regional aspirations. So if you're going to move people from one state to the other, then what's the point of holding elections? What's the point of a federal structure? So these are some of the apprehensions that political parties here have raised, and the largest amongst them being that could this cause a demographic shift?
And there was also an all-party meeting held on Monday regarding this. What were the highlights of that?
So on Monday, I think one of the biggest highlights of the meeting was that political parties or very wide-ranging political ideologies that you'd never seen came together on the issue of voting rights. This included the Congress, the JDU, the Shiv Sena, CPI, CPM, all these parties. Shiv Sena had never joined a meeting before. Congress has sort of had an on-again, off-again relationship with the PAGD, but even they joined the meeting yesterday. So all of these parties, the entire opposition, has said that they do not accept this and they are going to oppose this. And they have also sought more clarity. Okay, if these many people are going to be first-time voters, but give us clarity on what is going to be the cutoff for, please define ordinarily residing citizens for us. Please define if service members are going to get voting rights in Kashmir. So all of this ambiguity still exists on this issue. But from information is available, political parties have opposed this.
And Naveed, these political parties have been opposing these decisions for some time now, starting from the scrapping of J&K's special status and even the delimitation exercise. But what is the thing that is still giving them hope that this could all change and things could be reversed?
See, over the last 3 years, there has been very little political engagement between centre and state, apart from last year's meeting between the PM and the political leadership of JN. No real engagement has happened. So the only thing that a lot of political leaders here pin their hopes on is the legal challenge to the J&K Reorganization Act and the removal of Article 370 and 35A. So all these decisions, whether it is the introduction of domicile clause, the J&K into All India Cadre, and now this move to give voting rights to ordinarily residing citizens, all of this derives its legal legitimacy from the J&K Reorganization Act. So with that being challenged in the Supreme Court, J&K political parties here often bring up the point that if you're going to make changes that are irreversible, where does that leave this legal fight? So with that still in question, Supreme Court still hasn't given a date for hearing on those cases. So a lot of hopes are being pinned on that move.
And Naveed, has the central government given any indication as to when elections are expected to take place in the valley?
No indications have come from the centre, from the EC on when elections could take place. The Home Minister has repeatedly said that a delimitation will get completed and then we'll hold elections and then statehood will follow, etc. But no indications at all on when elections could take place, although the final date for revision of electoral rolls is November 25th. So until then, of course, we can't expect any announcements either.
And in the end, we talk about women in the field of science. Earlier this month, Dr. N. Kalai Selvi became the first woman Director General of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, or CSIR, which is India's largest research and development organization. In her report about this news, Indian Express's Esha Roy wrote that Dr. Kalai Selvi's appointment actually highlights a significant trend, which is that the participation of women in scientific research has been increasing over the past 20 years. In this segment, Esha joins us to talk about this increase and what the official data reveals about it.
Historically, the participation of women in science in India has not been very high. There was a separate chapter on women and development, which was introduced in the sixth five-year plan in the 1970s, but it took a lot longer for participation to increase. It's still a gradual process, but the latest data from the Department of Science and Technology shows that there is a steady increase in participation of women, especially in research. So women's participation in extramural research and development projects has increased from 13% in 2001 to 28% in 2018 and 19, which is quite a jump. The DST data also shows that the number of female researchers has increased from 13.9% in 2015 to 18.7% in 2018. So that's a jump of 25% in just 3 years. And it is believed that currently the number of female researchers involved in science is approximately 20%, although the Department of Science and Technology is still in the process of collecting and collating data.
And Esha, do we see this increase in participation across different fields of science?
Well, women have traditionally been more engaged in streams which are biology and medicine related. So while there has possibly been a slight marginal increase in engineering and technology, it's still low compared to other branches of science. Female researchers in engineering and technology is 14.5%. If you compare this to other branches such as natural sciences, the participation of women researchers is 22.5%. Health sciences is 24.5%. Agriculture is 22.5%. And of course, for non-science subjects like social sciences and humanities, it's much higher at 36.4%. So there is a gender gap between different streams of science, and possibly because engineering and technology, especially streams like mechanical engineering or civil engineering, are still viewed as very masculine disciplines to take up, as opposed to medicine-related, biology, biochemistry, biotechnology related fields, which are considered slightly more feminine.
And do we know the reason why we have seen this increase of participation of women in science during these past 20 years?
So, really, it's a combination of two different things. One is a natural progress, which would anyway have been made as society changes. For instance, when I was speaking with Dr. Kalai Selvi, she said that she herself had not faced any barriers in her career. She had a very smooth rise at every level, from just a scientist and a researcher to now the head of CSIR. But that is not the case for most women. The first break that women face in their careers as science researchers are in their early to mid-20s, which is when they are either doing their postdoctoral research, their MPhils, or starting their careers. Because when they get married, when they start building families, and there is a lot of societal pressure in India for women to get married irrespective of their careers. So a lot of women drop out of their careers at this point, and the avenues in the past decade for them to rejoin science research and other streams has been limited. And even when they do rejoin, naturally, because of the break in their career, they don't, for instance, a male counterpart would have reached far ahead, would have progressed a lot more than the woman who's rejoining their career. So that has been a major setback for women in science so far. Also, societal perspective, the way women in science have been viewed in the past. Women joining scientific fields was a rarity. It wasn't common, but now it's becoming more and more common. So that's the second reason, which is perspective and how families, parental support has increased tremendously. Women are not expected to marry early so much any longer. The degree of that expectation has decreased at least.
Yeah, and besides this, you also write that during this period, industries and agencies have also changed. And plus, now there is infrastructure that can make it easier for some women to learn and work remotely. But during this time, when we have seen this increase in participation, have we also seen an increase in the number of women in leadership roles?
Yes, there has been a push for that as well, although there's a lot more that needs to be done. Just as Dr. Kalai Selvi has been appointed, the head of the Department of Biotechnology till last year was Dr. Renu Sharma. In the Department of Science and Technology itself, out of 97 scientists that the DST employs, 35 are women. In the past 2 years, the majority of program committees in the DST have at least 20 to 25% women as a matter of policy. And their big achievement is that out of 18 divisions that the DST has, 11 divisions are headed by women. That's about 61% and probably one of the highest percentage of women leadership in any government department. So yes, the government is very consciously doing it. And there has been an increase in leadership. Now, what needs to be seen is if this increase in leadership is reflected in other science streams and agencies such as universities, labs across the country, the private players, the industry, IISc, NIITs. Does this reflect in these institutes as well? And that is what the government is looking into.
And you spoke to Dr. Kalai Selvi. What did she have to say about what CSIR wants to do about this trend going forward?
So Dr. Kalai Selvi the onerous responsibility of heading 38 labs and approximately 4,500 scientists across the country under CSIR. So what she did tell me during our conversation is that she has seen the landscape for women scientists change dramatically over the years. And when she started out, for instance, there was very little infrastructure and facilities for women to continue working after they have children and after they get married. But in the past couple of decades, many of the CSIR labs have begun creches, daycare centers. A lot of the residential colonies that these women scientists live in have also begun creches for children, which has allowed these women to continue with their careers and dedicate a lot more time that was required to their work. And that has in itself changed the rate of participation in these particular agencies and labs. And she said that as the head of CSIR, she will definitely look at the issue of increasing women's participation in this particular agency as well.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.